Excellencies, dear guests, a very good morning to all of you. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of Professor Rehman Sobhan and members of the CPD Board of Trustees and all my colleagues at CPD to this second CPD anniversary lecture. And I'm happy to recognize the presence of Sir Abed, our esteemed member of CPD Board of Trustees here. Dear guests, we are truly privileged and absolutely delighted to have Mr. Simon Maxwell, CBE, amongst us to deliver the CPD Anniversary Lecture 2015 on the theme of climate-compatible development, pathway or Pipedream. A globally renowned public intellectual, Mr. Maxwell is chair of the European think tank group and former director of Overseas Development Institute, ODI, London, the leading think tank in the UK. Mr. Maxwell is also serving as a specialist advisor to the International Development Select Committee of the UK House of Commons and also executive chair of Climate and Development Knowledge Network, CDKN. He is one of the leading thinkers on international development and an influential player in the global climate discourse. We are indeed very happy to have someone of such distinction and stature with us here today. Our sincere gratitude, Mr. Maxwell, for being with us today, for being such a good friend of CPD, and for kindly agreeing to deliver the lecture this morning. We look forward to listening and learning from you. Dear guests, for CPD anniversary lectures, we try to choose a theme that has global dimension, but with strong policy relevance and practical significance for Bangladesh. As many of you will recall, CPD's first anniversary lecture was held in November 2014 as part of its celebration of a 2-decade-long journey. On that occasion, Professor Luca Katselli, former Minister of Greece and former Director of OECD Development Center Paris, delivered the anniversary lecture on the theme of recent fiscal and labor market adjustment experiences in Europe, lessons for low-income countries. In this backdrop, this year's lecture theme is particularly pertinent in view of the recently held COP21 in Paris, where the landmark Paris Agreement on climate change was adopted. Mr. Maxwell's lecture will focus on how climate-compatible development could offer poverty-reducing and socially inclusive pathways for development of developing countries. As we will all agree, these are extremely important areas of concern and interest for our country, Bangladesh. Dear guests, before I invite my good friend, Dr. Devapriya Bhattacharya, Distinguished Fellow CPD, to introduce Mr. Maxwell, please allow me to take advantage of this opportunity to register our deep and sincere gratitude to all of you, our well-wishers and partners, for your support for and solidarity with the CPD in its continuing efforts in the areas of research, policy, outreach, and civic activism. We do hope to continue our journey together with you in 2016 in service of the cause of an economically advanced, environmentally sustainable, and socially just Bangladesh, a vision that informed the establishment of CPD in 1993 by our founding chairman, Professor Rehman Sobhan. Dear guests, it's my immense pleasure now to invite Devapriya to introduce our guest of honor who will deliver CPD Anniversary Lecture 2015, Mr. Simon Maxwell. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Excellencies, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, my colleagues. Today we are going to listen to a person who combines three very exquisite qualities. He oozes charm, combines with talent and wit, a very rare combination. The gentleman blends also the three worlds in certain way. He had been working in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America in his early days, during his 4 decades of career. And the fact that he has his head in the cloud, looks at the star, and keeps his feet on the ground In fact, that is where it all started. Since then, our speaker went on to IDS, one of the most esteemed center of excellence for development studies in Sussex, and performed empirical research on areas like food security, hunger, environment. And thereon, he of course came to lead one of the most globally reputed institutions, which had been a trailblazer in the development studies and humanitarian concerns, the Overseas Development Institute in London. The 12 years of our speaker's leadership and stewardship of ODI had been one of the golden chapters of this institute, which positioned itself in the leading ranks of all the think tanks in the world. Simon Maxwell went on, made the full circle from a field-level worker to an empirical researcher to a policy analyst and an advisor. I think, like many of us, getting disgusted with peer-reviewed journal article publication, he wanted to change the world and move into the policy area. And Simon had been a great influencing personality in the variable, not only in aid effectiveness during those days, on public finance, but also moved on gradually to the climate challenge issues. Simon, in many ways, combines the aspiration of any researcher or any policy advisor of our generation. In certain ways, he had been a great influencing factor, not only in the United Kingdom, but also in the global arena. He became the chair of the European group of think tanks. He went on to become the chair of the CDKN, the new Climate Development Knowledge Network. But more importantly, he is the expert advisor to the Select Committee of the House of Commons. I don't know how many of you met David Cameron last, but he had been with him last Tuesday, dealing with the COP outcome, COP21 outcome, and others. Mustafa has mentioned that we have invited Simon Maxwell to discuss an issue which is somewhere dominating the development scene, the climate issue. It is said that an intellectual is a person who can hold two contradictory thoughts simultaneously in his brain. And if you see the presentation which is going to come, he talks about a wicked problem and at the same time big opportunities. I couldn't see more contradictory two concepts being simultaneously delivered, and it can be only done by our speaker. Colleagues, Albert Camus once said that some people talk when they sleep, and some sleep when somebody talks. I can assure you that you will be long thinking and listening even after Simon has stopped talking. Let me present to you a great erudite economist whom I have seen haranguing and pushing around, bullying, I think, confused economists or researchers like me. I have seen him challenging the self-righteous NGOs, and I have seen him also pushing around the rhetorical politicians. I have shared with him many platforms across the world, and I have seen him in action. That's why I can say, we give you today a very erudite economist, a very polished and accomplished policy advisor, and most importantly for me, a great friend for the last 2 decades. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Simon Maxwell.
A lot shorter when I was 22, and the expectations were also less when I was 22. But Deborah Priya, thank you very much for that. And I'm going to pull this back so I can stand on the stage. I'm going to move around, if that's all right. I'm going to talk about these things. There is a printed text. There is a small possibility that what I say will bear any relationship to the printed text. But my main message to you is please don't read the printed text until after the lecture, because otherwise you won't see the PowerPoint. Before I talk about climate change and the wicked problem and how we can solve it and the three legs of delivering climate-compatible development, policy leadership, policy design, and policy implementation, I want to say something about CPD and about Bangladesh, because CPD stands for values which are every day more important in the world. The values of tolerance, the values of dialogue, the values of analysis used for policy debate in a neutral and independent manner. And I will come back at the end of the talk to say a little bit more about values. Am I in the way? Do you want me to move? No. I will come back in a while to say a little bit more about the importance of values driving the work that we do on development and on climate change. But CPD for many years has been a model for us in the UK. I can't speak for its work in Bangladesh, but I do know about the work you've done internationally on trade, on least developed countries, the work that you've been doing on Southern Voices, helping to shape the SDGs. And you have had astounding leadership in the shape of Rehman Sobhan, of course, of Debapriya Bhattacharya, and now of Mustafaviz Rahman. Congratulations for what you've achieved for Bangladesh, but also for the world in the work that you've done. Of course, it's particularly sad to be in Bangladesh just after the death of Mahbub Hussain, who was a member of the board of CPD and very well respected in the UK as one of Bangladesh's outstanding academics in this field. Bangladesh also deserves congratulations before we move on, because you have played a leading role in the climate debate. I was in Paris in December, and Bangladesh has contributed enormously to putting the issue of vulnerability on the public stage alongside mitigation. You have helped to influence the spending priorities of the Green Climate Fund, and you played a leadership role in the Climate Vulnerable Forum, and leaders like Salim ul-Haq, who I think is here, have really imposed a Bangladeshi vision of the world on the world, and I think you deserve congratulations for that, Salim, and all of you who work in this field. Bangladesh has been at the heart of what we've done on development studies since I began, and I studied at Oxford in the 1960s, and in those days, even before independence, developments in Bangladesh were very much the center of attention, and the Camilla Rural Development Project was something we were taught about when I sat at the feet of my professors. And it's astounding to me to see what a long way Bangladesh has come in the many years since then. And I want to share with you an exercise that I often do with audiences in Europe to show them that development works. And in order for this exercise to work, I would like to ask you all, please, to stand up.
This is where Simon Maxwell goes. He'll make you work too.
Now, the numbers don't quite work, but let's say that roughly half the audience is saying, let's not take let's take from you, sir, backwards there. On this side, you were born in 1960. From you, sir, to the right, your left, my right, you were born today. And what I'm interested in is how many of you managed to complete primary school as a very simple, basic indicator of progress in Bangladesh. On this side, a quarter of you, I'm sorry to say, died before the age of 5. So I would like a quarter of you to sit down, and let's say that is everybody except for the first 3 rows of this block. Everybody sit down who is not in the first 3 rows. I once did this with a group of 800 school children in the UK, and I said, you have died. So all the children went, and they did film-style deaths. Of those of you who survived to the age of 5 in the 1960s, approximately 40% managed to complete primary school. So I would like 60% of you to sit down, which is all of you. And let's say everybody except for the first 3 rows of those of you who are left in 1960, everybody sit down except for this small group here. So you, sir, in the blue jacket, you can sit down. Of all of those born in the late 1960s, this is the group that managed to complete a primary school. Now let's look at today. Infant mortality, child mortality in Bangladesh has dropped dramatically and is now only 40 per 1,000. So we need just 4% of you to sit down. So let's say the back 2 or 3 rows over there, please sit down. Try to die quietly, that would be very helpful. Very good. Of the remainder of you, 70% have finished primary school. So we only need another 30% to sit down, so perhaps you people over there could sit down. And the back, say, 2 rows, sit down. And this is the illustration I want to make, which is the progress that Bangladesh has made in the last 40 years, from a very small group of the cohort that was able to survive to the age of 5 and finish primary school, to now a much more substantial cohort. I think we may even have underestimated the size of the cohort. And it is you who are the difference between the old Bangladesh and the new Bangladesh who hold the key to Bangladesh's future in your hands. I congratulate Bangladesh, but I also impress on you the responsibility that you have to take Bangladesh forward. Thank you very much. Please sit down. It is impossible to come to Bangladesh, and this is only my 2nd visit, without feeling optimistic about the progress that Bangladesh has made, and I know the progress Bangladesh will make in the future. So I'm proud to be a friend of CPD, and I'm very, very happy and honored to be in Bangladesh. Now, those remarks I made about CPD, about the importance of research and dialogue linked to policy, are not kind of casual remarks. They are part of a much bigger story about... Am I doing something wrong here? There, no. Yeah, there, sorry. I'm part of a much bigger story which is based in literature about the important role of think tanks and the link between research and policy. And when I was running a think tank, on their first day at the institution, I would give every member of staff a copy of this picture and ask them to keep it under their pillow, hoping that during the night the ideas in it would percolate into their heads. Sometimes it did, sometimes they didn't. There are 4 role models for those of us who work at the interface of research and policy. Top left, Scheherazade, the tale of the 1001 nights. The Sultan had been betrayed, had decided to marry a different woman every night and then assassinate her in the morning. Scheherazade, the daughter of the Grand Vizier, said, "Father, I can solve this problem. Let me tell a story to the Grand Vizier." And she told him, to the Sultan, she told him a story every night, and the story never quite finished when dawn came, so he could never cut off her head. We in the think tank world need to be able to tell a good story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. We need to be able to offer ministers options, and we must not ever end our papers saying, "The main conclusion of my work is that there should be more research." The second role model is Paul Revere. Paul Revere is famous because he raised the militia against the British in 1775. And he galloped around the villages, and people opened their doors and their windows, and they saw Paul Revere, and they came to join the campaign against the British. He wasn't the first or the last person to campaign against the British, but he was very successful because he was connected. Paul Revere was a pewtersmith in Boston. He knew everybody. He was on all the local committees. He was networked. In the world of the think tanks, researchers need to be networked. When the minister needs a solution to a problem, it's important that she or he picks up the phone to CPD, not to any of these other institutions that we hear about in Bangladesh, BIDS and the Center for Advanced Ideas, but CPD has to be in the network. And of course, networks don't happen, they have to be built. And so researchers have to invest also in making sure that they have the right networks. The third role model is Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Brunel was an engineer and an innovator, iron bridges, iron ships, railways, but he innovated on the ground, and he was a practical researcher who dealt with everyday practical problems and not the high fields of theory on their own or overly obsessed with abstruse and theoretical econometrics. This was a man who solved problems. That is also our mission. And finally, I used to use Machiavelli, but now I use Rasputin because when you see pictures of Machiavelli, he was a gentleman who liked children and probably gave to charity and so on, whereas Rasputin looks the part of the man who thinks about the politics. And we in the research and development think tank community need to be thinking always about the politics of what we do. Who is making the decisions? When are they making them? What are the pressures on decision makers? How can we help to chart a course through the difficult minefield that many policymakers have to inhabit? And these are not abstract. These are literature-based, but they're also very practical ways of thinking for those of us in the think tank world. And they are what CP does, I think, in its work every day. Of course, if you're an international think tank, there is one additional element to take account of, which is that the decisions that we try to influence, think of the COP in Paris, are international decisions with many stakeholders and many players. And as we thought about this at Sussex, at ODI, we thought that we were not Microsoft. Microsoft, every time you turn on your computer, you get the same homepage and the same message about climate change written in CPD. That is hegemonic. We did not want to be hegemonic. The second option is McDonald's. McDonald's is an interesting company because it's a franchise. The local branch of McDonald's is usually owned by a local business person, and so it is locally owned and rooted. But every time you walk through the front door, what do you get? You get the same hamburger, more or less, to the same recipe. And again, it becomes universal, and that doesn't seem quite to work for us. So the third model. The third model is the airline alliance, the Star Alliance or British Airways, One World, in which companies which have different perspectives and different missions and different balance sheets and different owners decide to work together. It's the model of collaborative competition, much studied in the Italian furniture industry, for example, where companies compete on some areas but may work together in others. And they talk about, the airlines talk about code sharing. You put your suitcase on the plane in Canberra, and 3 days later and 3 flights, if you're lucky, it arrives with you in Copenhagen. Code sharing. We talk about policy code sharing, about creating networks of institutions within countries and across countries that work together in order to deliver better policy and to deliver change. And we formed, therefore, the European Think Tanks Group, and it's the kind of network that CPD is very much involved in its work. I give you all that by way of introduction to emphasize to you that in the Bangladesh context, but also globally, CPD is a very precious institution which performs a very important function in policy making, and we think tanks should stick together in solidarity. So I hope one day you will come to London, Deb, and say the same thing about ODI, that the world needs ODI as much as it needs CPD.
I was talking about Simon Maxwell's principle.
Let me come on to something more current, which is why I think we are presented with a really difficult problem at the beginning of 2016, having agreed the SDGs and having, at Paris, thanks to the brilliant leadership of the French, achieved a deal on climate in the UNFCCC Conference of the Parties. We know that as regards poverty, there have been huge elements of progress during the period of the Millennium Development Goals, dramatic reductions in infant mortality, in child mortality, in women's health, in primary school participation, and in many other aspects of development. And we saw that for Bangladesh in the exercise that we did just now. But of course we have to move on, and we're now presented with the new global goals, the 17 goals of the new Sustainable Development Goal framework adopted in September in New York, and in many respects a triumph. They are universal. They don't just apply to developing countries, they also apply to developed countries. And we have now a big debate in Europe about poverty reduction, sustainability, and so on. They're universal. They cover both development and poverty reduction on one side and environment on the other. a very important step forward. But they're also really problematic goals because they are so ambitious and so all-encompassing. And Deb and I have debated this topic many times. The 17 goals, the 169 targets, the 1,000 plus indicators impose on countries, including countries like Bangladesh, an enormously complicated task of delivery. And you ask yourself when you look at this, is it possible to have absolute reduction of poverty to zero, at the same time continue to grow rapidly, at the same time preserve the oceans and the lakes and the rivers and all the other aspects, the air quality of the environment, and produce functioning, legitimate institutions in every country with the rule of law? Are there no choices? Has everything been included here? And when you go down a level from this to the 169 targets, indeed you find that everything is in there. And my sense is that if nobody is disappointed at this final negotiated outcome, then you know what? No tough choices have been made. And if you look at the final text of the agreement in New York, I think people sort of know that, but don't quite like to say so. There is an important clause which says that in the end, the decisions will be made at the country level. And it is countries that will decide how to interpret this framework, which becomes not a manifesto exactly, but it becomes an authorizing framework. So that if you want to work on these things, you can, and we encourage you to do whatever you can. But when it comes to deciding, and we'll come to this a little bit later on, but should we be doing this investment to build the last primary school in the hills, or should we be doing this work to clean up the rivers in the capital city, for example? There are always choices to be made. Planning is about choosing. We can aspire to this set of goals, but we have to be sensible. And a very well-known chief economist of DFID, of the UK Aid Ministry, Professor Adrian Wood, once said, take the Millennium Development Goals seriously, but not literally. And I think Adrian would say the same thing about this program. Take it seriously, but don't take it absolutely literally, and be intelligent in how you interpret the goals. And that, of course, gives us a great deal of room for maneuver. There are some illogicalities in this which drive me completely bananas, actually. Why is growth, for example, a high-level goal at the same level as poverty reduction? Growth is an instrument. We don't want a world dominated by growth. We want a world dominated by the idea of social justice for all, by equality, and by achieving the human development potential of people. Growth is a means to an end. It's not a goal. And there are many other examples of that kind embedded in this text. Those of us who work in the aid business know about logical frameworks. And I was screaming to get hold of this document and reorganize it in a more logical structure. I was sitting by the phone waiting for Ban Ki-moon to ring, but he didn't. So unfortunately, we have what we have. Now, climate is here. It's on the agenda. I think it's goal 13, climate action. And we were excited about Paris when we went to Paris. And there were 3 distinct communities at the climate talks in Paris. There was a serious part of the operation where people strode around carrying their papers, looking serious, staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning, talking about mitigation and so on. There was round the corner in a different zone, the generation zone, where the average age was 22. Most people had blue paint on their faces. They were writing messages to the earth and hanging it on trees. They were pedaling bicycles in order to provide electricity for the sound system on the stage. This was the enthusiasm and passion and energy of the people who will have to live with climate change. And then all around Paris, there were other meetings of professionals on land use and on the days that Salim helped to organize on climate and development, where we had very good debates with Mary Robinson and others about climate justice. We achieved a lot in Paris. There was an agreement. Who thought after Copenhagen there would be an agreement on climate change? 185 countries submitted their climate plans, including, of course, Bangladesh. There was agreement to regular review of those plans. There was agreement to have a floor of $100 billion worth of finance available to developing countries from richer countries. And there were a whole lot of subsidiary agreements about sharing technology and so on. So why did I come away from Paris feeling that although the glass was certainly half full, it was also certainly half empty? This is why. The diagram is in the lecture, but don't look at it until I've finished. And let me explain what these numbers mean. We know that climate change is a real risk on the current trajectory of emissions. Up to 4 degrees warming, which would probably mean the death of many riverine systems because sea level rise would swamp so much land, and it would cause huge heat stress in many countries. Tens of thousands of people died in Europe during the last heat wave in the mid-2000s, especially in France. And there will be many other cases like that. And of course, many other consequences of extreme events and weather events. If before the whole Paris process started, we had projected what the emissions were going to be, they were going to be 60 gigatons a year by 2030, which would have guaranteed a temperature rise of something like 4 degrees. We know from the integrated assessment models that have been produced that by 2030, 60 is no good, 50 is no good, 45 is no good. We have to be at 42 gigatons of emissions in 2030 in order to keep warming to 2 degrees. And remember that the Paris Agreement had an even more ambitious goal of trying to achieve 1.5 degrees. But the key number, the only number you need to remember in climate change really, is 42. We have to get to 42 tons by 2030. So let's add up all these intended nationally determined contributions, the 185 submissions made by governments. They imply warming of between, emissions of between 55 to 57. We're at 60, we need to be at 42. All that effort, all that contribution from countries, all those difficult decisions made in producing INDCs get us from 60 to somewhere between 55 and 57, 25% of what needs to happen by 2030. So countries that have submitted INDCs and think they've done the job if they deliver those need to think again. Because we are not going to have 2 degrees unless we make further very, very substantial reductions. Now, you can be optimistic. You can say, well, countries, of course, were going to under pledge in Paris because then they can stand up and say we've done more than we said we would, and that is better than saying we've done less than we said we would. But nevertheless, and we can hope that the private sector will respond even more enthusiastically than it did in Paris with new technologies, and we'll be able to say we're going faster than we pledged. But we have to go a lot faster than we pledged, and we have to really make some tough decisions, and the risk is that the Paris contributions, tough as they were by many countries, actually are the low-hanging fruit. And the really big transformations in the world economy that will come are going to be much more difficult to achieve. I'm not going to talk about Bangladesh in this lecture because it's a golden rule of giving visiting lectures that you should not put your foot in it by saying something about a country you don't know. But I'm going to talk a bit about the UK later on. But just imagine, because just to say one thing about Bangladesh, this is a country in which agriculture still is the major employer and employs 30%, I think, of the labor force. By 2070, at the absolute latest, the world must get to 0 carbon emissions. Agriculture is a major emitter of, a major contributor to the carbon emissions of the world. So how does Bangladesh get not to a little bit of carbon, not to less carbon than today, but how does Bangladesh get to a 0 carbon agriculture in the lifetime of many people in this room? When we know that, of course, animal production and even rice production under irrigated conditions is a major contributor to global warming, when we know that forests are being reduced everywhere. And how do we do that while simultaneously doing all these other things we're supposed to do? I think we have a much more difficult problem than we imagine in dealing with this combination of development and the environment in the years ahead. And that's why I say that the link between climate change and development presents us with what is a classic, wicked problem. A problem which is unstable, requires multidisciplinary analysis, where the outcomes are unknown, where we are embarking together on an adventure where we will need to be highly flexible and highly adaptable, learning all the lessons of complexity theory, for example, in order to change the economies and deliver what we need to deliver. It's a hugely exciting and important and difficult challenge for those of us who are researchers, but even more so for those of you in the room who are policymakers, because actually very tough decisions will be made and there will be serious winners and also serious losers. And the development process is about managing that at the same time as population increases, agriculture gives way to industry and services, urbanization takes place, and so on. We're riding a tiger. And I know that the Bangladesh tigers have been extremely successful, including yesterday. Congratulations. There are some very fierce tigers we will have to ride in the years ahead. Now, we have a way of thinking about this in the Climate and Development Knowledge Network, and I want to say something about what I think has really been missing in the whole debate about climate change. The model we have is this Venn diagram of three overlapping circles. On the bottom left, we have, I think we have on the bottom left, adaptation. Is that adaptation? Mitigation. Sorry, mitigation is on the bottom left. I've been talking about mitigation. We know we have to get to zero carbon by 2070 and zero all greenhouse gases, including the short-lived gases, by about 20 years after that. That's a huge challenge, especially for countries which want to grow and cement their middle-income status and so on and so forth. We have adaptation, a main focus of Bangladesh's current preoccupations because you are so vulnerable and also because of the fact that you have relatively low carbon emissions. What is very little discussed in the climate world is, for me, actually the most important, which is the third circle, which is about what everybody else will be doing to tackle this problem and how that will affect you. You're running an industry, maybe a factory in a country, say a textile factory in Bangladesh. You need to know that your next-door neighbor in another country is making a big investment in renewable energy and energy efficiency, which will reduce costs. Because they're your competitors, and if you're not up to date with the latest technology, you may find yourself left behind. You're producing, I don't know, horticultural products in an African country, and there's discussion of a tax, a carbon tax on airline fuel. You need to know what the impact of that tax is going to be on the relative competitiveness of your industry compared to the industry that is a bit closer to the market. Say, if you're in Kenya and Ethiopia is your competitor, it may not be a big difference, but it might be. And you need to have that analysis of competition. I've looked through some INDCs. I don't see the discussion of competitiveness. I don't see the word comparative advantage, competitive advantage being used in this context. That is a real risk for any country, to be blinkered in this global competition, in this global marketplace that we now have, if you are not thinking about not the impact of climate change, but the impact of the actions we are taking on climate change across the world on your policies, on your industries and your development. So competitiveness analysis is an absolutely key part of the climate change discussion, which connects it even more closely, of course, to development. And this is just an illustration of the competitiveness index produced by the World Economic Forum. And as you see there, it privileges, of course, underlying resources and so on, but it also talks a lot about innovation, about science, about the role of infrastructure in supporting change, about the role of the state as an entrepreneurial state, as Mariana Mazzucato has it, supporting innovation and making change possible. I haven't checked the Bangladesh INDC, but if it doesn't talk about competitiveness analysis, I would argue to you that you might be missing a trick and that you need to think about the right-hand side of that World Competitiveness Index analysis to see what has to be done in order to make sure that the gains Bangladesh has made don't disappear in the coming years. I have looked up the position of Bangladesh on the Competitiveness Index ranking produced by the World Economic Forum, but I'm not going to talk about Bangladesh, so you can look it up yourselves. So how do we deliver this change, which has to include mitigation, has to include adaptation, has to include this global transformation, and at the same time has to deal with all the other SDGs? There are three pillars, and I want to say something briefly about each of those. Leadership, absolutely key. Policy design, especially dealing with the winners and losers. and policy implementation. Let's deal a little bit first with leadership, because I think it has to come from the top. And I am an amateur student of leadership and how it works. And I want just to show you a couple of examples. There are many people I could have chosen to illustrate passionate leadership. Of course, Obama would have been a very good example, but I've chosen Bill Clinton because he has a very particular story, which I like very much. And I've heard him deliver this story in Davos. Clinton was appointed as the president's representative on the tsunami, after the tsunami hit, especially in Asia. And he was in Indonesia with an interpreter, goes to a refugee camp. And he meets a couple with their child, a little boy. And the way he tells his story, this little boy is the most beautiful child he's ever met. Shining eyes, shining hair, fit and healthy. And President Clinton talks about how this child really impressed him as a absolutely charming young Indonesian. And he says to the parents, I must tell you that I've traveled all over the world, but this child of yours is absolutely beautiful, and I wanted to congratulate you. And they say, thank you, Mr. President. He had 9 brothers and sisters, and they all died in the tsunami. And when Clinton tells that story, and he pauses, you can hear a pin drop. Because what you see there is, first of all, that President Clinton has really absorbed the personal stories embedded in the tragedy of the tsunami. But he's also able to communicate them to people in a way which touches their heart and gives them the emotional vigor to carry forward the campaign to do something about these problems. And that's what we need in climate change. It has to come every day from the highest level across the world, framing this debate, explaining it to people. And it has to be explained to people in words that they understand. I've put 2 other great leaders on this slide, because one of the interesting streams of literature is about how you talk to different kinds of people. And I've stolen this from, I think, from Dan Gardner's book on risk. On the left, on the right, let me start on the right, we have Dr. Spock from Star Trek. And Captain Kirk, in one episode, says to Dr. Spock, you know, Spock, you're so logical and clear and lacking in emotion, you're exactly like a computer. And Dr. Spock says, thank you, Captain, because for him that is a great compliment. He's somebody who thinks logically. You can send him all the data about carbon emissions and parts per million, he'll be delighted. On the left, we have Homer Simpson. Homer Simpson goes into a gun shop. He wants to buy a gun, and he looks at all the guns, and he chooses a gun, and he chooses the ammunition. He goes to the counter, and they say, oh, I'm really sorry, sir, there's a 48-hour cooling off period, waiting period, before you can have the gun under our state laws. And Homer Simpson says, that's no good, I'm mad now. He's emotional. You have to tell him a story which captures his imagination in a completely different way to the one you tell to Dr. Spock. Think tanks, leaders, what stories are we telling to people that cover both the Spock end of the spectrum and the Homer Simpson end of the spectrum? I talk about climate change a lot. I never talk about the numbers because they're too complicated, there are too many probabilities, there are too many things to explain. I use pictures. And this is one picture I like a lot. I'm sorry it's not an Asian picture, but it's Europe. This is from a World Bank report. It shows where the capital cities of Europe will look like if temperature rises by 2 degrees. So we see that the UK, London, ends up like somewhere in northern Portugal. Other places end up around the Mediterranean. And the one I like a lot is that Berlin ends up looking like somewhere in Algeria called Clef. I'd never heard of Clef. I looked it up on the internet. On the left, we have a picture of Berlin today. Leafy, green, the lakes, the quiet walks on a Sunday afternoon around the lake. Actually, I went for a walk around the lake once in Berlin. They like what we call in English skinny dipping. So they like to sunbathe naked and go swimming naked. I was kind of walking around the lake with my face turned away. But anyway, it was very interesting. On the right are some pictures of Clef. So this is Berlin today on the left, and you can see the camels, you can see the sand dunes on the right. So my main message to you is that if we don't deal with climate change and you go to Berlin, take your sunglasses and take your hat and take your desert boots. We underestimate the damage that climate change will do to the planet. This is why it's important to deal with. And here's another one slightly more serious, which illustrates on the left the areas of Uganda which are suitable for coffee. 30% of export, 3.5 million people. The major industry in Uganda is coffee, up and down the hills. And on the right is the area of Uganda suitable for coffee if temperature rises by 2 degrees. Coffee disappears effectively from Uganda. And right across the world where these crops are produced, in Sri Lanka, in India, in East Africa, in South America, coffee and tea will move up the mountain 400 meters if climate change hits 2 degrees. And in many cases, there isn't 400 meters to move up because you run out of mountain or perhaps you run into protected areas at that altitude. Major dislocations are going to happen if we don't deal with climate change, and of course, if we do. The job of leaders, the job of you in think tanks and policy advisors and all of us is to make this case clear to people so they understand the importance of dealing with the problem. Parliament plays a really important part in that, and Parliament needs to work in a cross-party way. In the UK, we have a series of select committees, and as Deb said, I advise one of those, but we also have all-party parliamentary groups, and we have an all-party parliamentary group on climate change, which helps to build political understanding and build a national consensus on climate change. When we passed in the UK the first Climate Change Act in the world, only 5 MPs out of 650 voted against it because this work had been done to build the foundations. Parliaments need all-party groups. Parliaments need to be at the forefront of explaining and leading the need to act on climate change. Now let me come to policy design, because this is where the rubber hits the road for those of us who work on what might be done. Largely because there are many losers as many winners. And when I was at the Institute of Development Studies, the guiding question always was, who gains, who loses? Well, we can see that renewable energy is a key part of the action on climate change. This is an illustration. We're making progress. $350 billion worth of investment in renewables in 2015, $260 billion the year before. We're now up to 20% renewables in the total final energy supply, so we're making progress. But always there are winners and there are losers and there are difficult decisions to make. And I'm going to show you some illustrations from the UK, not with any particular position on these issues myself, but to illustrate the pressure that policymakers are under as they try to deal with this issue. The oil price, as we all know, began to fall in 2014, has fallen a lot further since this article was published in The Guardian. But the first thing that George Osborne did when the oil price fell was to increase the incentives for people to invest in the North Sea and to reduce the tax burden on people who were exploiting oil and gas in the North Sea. The environmentalists were furious because this was an opportunity to close down oil and gas and not do it and transfer resources into the green economy and solar panels and everything else. Why did George Osborne do that? Well, here's the answer on this slide. The oil and gas sector in the UK employs about 500,000 people. Add in their families, add in the shops where they buy food, the schools where their children go. You have got a very sizable part of the British economy that is dealing with this sector. Do you close it down immediately? Do you do to that sector what some people say was done to the coal mines in the 1980s? You put people out of a job, you destroy their livelihood, their culture, their homes and everything for the sake of the climate? Of course you don't. You have to find a way of balancing things and doing things in a transition mode and taking things step by step. And this has been a very active debate still in the UK. And again, remember, I'm not saying whether I agree with these positions or not. I'm trying to illustrate the dilemmas that we face. Here is a set of slides about on the left, a series of headlines from the newspapers in the UK in recent days, where we've had, by the way, tremendous flooding in the north of England, £5 billion worth of damage in the last month. climate change strongly linked to UK flooding, but the government has been reducing its solar subsidy, and it has been putting wind farms at risk because people don't like onshore wind in their back gardens. And David Cameron has been accused of backsliding. Well, Deb said that I was present with the Prime Minister at the committee of MPs that he was in front of last week. I wasn't actually, because thanks to the internet, I watched it at home and tweeted from the comfort of my own office at home. But here he is sitting there. This is a good position for a politician, thinking through the problem, denying that they're backsliding, saying that the UK would meet their targets, but also saying, you know what, we have difficult decisions to take. We had a big research program on carbon capture and storage, £1 billion, abandoned. And David Cameron said in this liaison committee, you know what, it was costing £1 billion. I could have spent that £1 billion on flood defences. And that's what I've decided to do, is to reallocate the money to something else that will benefit people. So here's the challenge for us as think tankers and policymakers, is to find a pathway to zero carbon, to increased resilience, which at the same time doesn't leave people worse off. There are many interesting examples around the world, but I very much like the initial attempts the Australians made in this area. A commitment to increase the price of energy for people at home in order to discourage use. But let's not make things worse for people. So we're going to increase social security payments, and we're going to increase old age pensions, and we're going to increase tax codes so that people are not worse off, but we're encouraging them to change the pattern of their distribution. Let's get industry to change its practices and become much more climate friendly, but not straight away. We'll do it in phases. We'll provide an innovation fund so that factories can upgrade and buy new technology. And we will have a big central research program to help them. Remember what I said earlier about the importance of the entrepreneurial state. So that's the challenge for us, is to think about policy and to do it in a way which protects the losers, because always we care first about the poorest, and we want to stretch out into the future, making these changes in a way which delivers both better carbon and the rest of the SDGs. And in the Climate and Development Knowledge Network, and I'm delighted that Munjirul is here. Where are you, Munjirul? We are working on this in 70 different countries, trying to find practical policy for people. And finally, implementation, a topic I became interested in when I was in another country, and I won't say which. And a team of people showed me their brilliant plan for dealing with climate change in a plastic folder. Very elegant. And I said, that's a really nice plan. What happens next? And the woman who'd made the presentation said, oh, that's somebody else's problem. Which, of course, is something that we planners are very familiar with. I became interested in implementation. It's something that, of course, there's a lot of literature on. Again, how do you build consensus for change and deliver change over time? Here is something from Kotter's book, Kotter's method of dealing with change. But there are some other examples as well. I liked this book on the left very much by Andrew Adonis, who was a British minister who worked on education with Tony Blair. Of course, Tony Blair famously said he had scars on his back from trying to reform the public sector. Andrew Adonis talks a little bit about how to do that, micromanage all the important issues. Reform is a marathon, not a sprint, and so on. But I think there are some other interesting examples. I don't know how many of you watch House of Cards, which was originally a British drama but is now an American drama with Kevin Spacey, about a completely ruthless politician. And I watched, every time I think about climate change or development, I think about Kevin Spacey and how you have to be absolutely determined to make change happen and deal with it. But another very interesting example is the contrast between John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson. And I can highly recommend the biographies of Lyndon Johnson by Anthony Caro. Now, I think he's in volume 3. He's got as far as the Johnson inauguration. And to summarize the story very briefly, Kennedy, of course, was an inspiring, visionary leader, didn't really have the chance to deliver very much before he was assassinated. But his team had a real conflict with Lyndon Johnson, who had a different trajectory. Johnson had come up through the hard grind of the House and then the Senate, would sit in the majority leader's room with his tally sheets, trying to manage the votes. He was apparently a ruthless negotiator. He would go to his interlocutor and he would put his arm around them like this, and he would take their jacket like this, and he would not let go until Mustafiz agreed with him. I hope you agree. And of course, he was a very big man, Lyndon Johnson. When the Kennedy presidency began, the Camelot types who surrounded Kennedy were allegedly very, very dismissive of Johnson. He was a country hick from Texas. He was from the South, which was not known to be very progressive in those days. And they ignored his advice. Now, Johnson said to them, if you want to do desegregation, get the budget done first, because if you try to do the budget and desegregation at the same time, then what will happen is that the Southern senators will filibuster, and you will never get the agreement through. And they all laughed. Kennedy is assassinated. Tragically, Johnson becomes president. In 3 months, he has achieved both the budget and desegregation, because he knew how to work the machine. How many of our leaders around the world are either Kennedy or Johnson, but not both? And how badly do we need leaders who can tell the story, who can inspire people in the way that Bill Clinton did, and of course the way Obama does, and the way many others do, but can also do the hard grind of delivering legislation through the parliament, making sure the administration works, dealing with all those issues about the rent seeking and the blockages in the bureaucracy. We love plans, but we should also love implementation, because implementation is what makes things happen. So I'm coming to the end. We are presented with a wicked problem of trying to deliver radical changes in the world economy, in national, in local, in household economies, in order to make our world sustainable, to manage those changes at the same time as we deliver the Sustainable Development Goals, and at the same time as we deal with the other deep transformations in the world economy. We need to think not just about mitigation and adaptation, but also about transformation, that upper circle in my Venn diagram. And to do that, we need to think about the 3 pillars of change. Leadership, inspiring and focused and forward-looking leadership. We need to make sure that we have policy which takes account of the losers as well as the winners, and not be glib about the possibility of technical change solving all our problems. And we need then to focus on the hard grind day-to-day of implementation. And as we do all that, we have to remember the place that I started, which is that our business, for all of us in this room, for the think tanks and the policymakers and everybody else, and for the public, our business is based on values. Our business is based on the understanding we have in our multidisciplinary development studies, for example, about the need to work together, about the need to listen to each other, about the need for tolerance and understanding, about making sure that we have a peaceful environment in which we can debate things with honesty and frankness, without rancor and without comeback on people. Because if we don't work together, and Benjamin Franklin said this, I think, we either hang together or we hang separately. I don't want to hang separately. I want us to hang together. I want us to deliver the SDGs, including climate-compatible development. Thank you very much.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I guess a wicked problem needs a wicked solution too, which comes from a wicked mind. But what is a wicked mind? That's a combination of charm, wit, and talent, which I promise you today. And no wonder we waited 2016 to get an anniversary lecture of 2015. Now you know why we waited for Simon Maxwell. Give him a big hand, please. Since Mustafiz has lost his voice, you will have to tolerate me for a couple of minutes more. So the point is that we are going to take some comments, observations, and questions from the floor. But Simon has alerted me on a number of occasions he doesn't want to turn his post-lecture sessions into Q&A sessions. So I think just like CPD believes that the knowledge lies out there, so he also believes that he wants to also get it on that. So, but let us be very brief. I always remember my grandmother, the mentor. She said, if you cannot express your thoughts in 1 minute, you will never be able to do it in 10 minutes. So please be brief. We will do take some couple of points from the floor. My colleagues will help me to give the microphones. Please hold one on that side and one on this side. Share it with somebody else. Sanjita, take the microphone from this side, please. And if I don't see your hand, that has nothing to do with me. I am myopic, of course, but I don't see because of the lights are on my face. So please be assertive when you raise your hand. Introduce yourself, and also then we will take the points. And I'll be rude, and please, if you do on talking more than a minute or so, please, the gentleman on the second row. Let's start.
I am Dr. Abdul Hai Muzumdar, rubber cultivation expert. I'm an environmentalist and environmental scientist. My sorrow and regret is that when people of our leadership and upside likes to say carbon release, they confused it. Actually, scientifically, the word is carbon dioxide release to the air. These people cannot understand the lump of coal will not be released in the air. So what happened? They are saying all coal are burned. Where you are getting the release? Actually, they are right. In this sense, carbon, C, reacts with oxygen. That gives rise to carbon dioxide. Where carbon dioxide will be produced, so must produce carbon monoxide, which is a dangerously poison. If one little drop of carbon monoxide, liquid carbon monoxide is released from the rooftop, we all will die before completion of 1 minute. If we die, how honeybees, how other insects can survive? Cannot.
Thank you, sir.
If you look to Sakaria Sundarban, no more it is existing. Still they are saying, your death will be very nice one. But you, comfortable one, you just agree to die. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You mentioned honeybee. One of sons of Simon Maxwell is a social entrepreneur dealing with honeybees. So you got the right questions on that. Let me invite the High Commissioner from Maldives, a country which is also a climate-affected country. Excellency.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Allow me to briefly thank the CPD for inviting me to this lecture. Since the Paris Agreement, Paris discussions, I think this is the first major event that I have been with regard to climate compatible or climate change and development. And I feel that we should actually be having more discussions on this topic, especially from think tanks and other organizations, so that as Mr. Maxwell mentioned, we keep sensitizing politicians and governments on the importance of climate development. And for us in the Maldives, we have just taken on the chair of AOSIS, which is the Association of Small Island States. And that we feel is very important in terms of taking leadership on a global stage, especially to combat the impact of climate change, the sea level rise for small island states. I will not ask a question, it's just a brief comment on that.
Thank you very much. We wish Maldives all the best as the leader of the new seed tenure in that way. So let me come to the right side. Yes, please. I can't see anybody now from here. এখানে নিয়ে আসো সামনে দেন না I will come to this side. I will come to the younger people and also the activist colleagues.
Thank you, Mr. Maxwell, for an excellent lecture. I have a very short question. That is, Copenhagen Consensus didn't agree with the SDG goals. Do you have any comment on that?
Thank you. So let's come to this side a bit. Huh?
Simon, it was a pleasure listening to you. My name is Farah Kabir. I'm country director of Action Aid and an activist and a development practitioner. My question is that we often have this discussion about development and the use of fossil fuel, and I wonder if there's any analysis of the use of energy and all kinds of negative energy in the arms industry and the amount of money that is being spent, and how that could be reviewed and can be used for actually climate change and development.
Okay. Climate financing will need innovative financing, and defense expenditure seems to be one of the sources. Let me come to the young colleagues, and then we will come over there, please.
Thank you, sir. My name is Mustasin. I'm a student of economics at the University of Dhaka. It was an enlightening lecture, and I just have one question for you. I wanted to ask that we understand the long-term costs of environment and problems of environment, but how can an average farmer make this understanding that why would they forego the present gains that they have for a future gain that they might receive or their next generation might receive? How can we make them understand that? Thank you.
How to communicate the logic of deferred satisfaction for next generation. Yes, please.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Simon, for this interesting and to some
Please
extent...
introduce yourself.
My name is Tanvir Siddiqui. I'm representing Change Makers. It's a civic education organization, but we also work on many issues. The thing is this, my only question is whether we are going to live or die. And if we are going to die, it is when. Thank you.
My only request is, don't do it till this function is finished. Okay, I'll come to that, please. I'll move to the right side now.
Good morning to all of you. My name is Sharif Jamil. I am serving as one of the joint secretaries in BAPA and also as council board member of a global platform Waterkeeper Alliance. We all know Bangladesh is the largest active delta in the world, and protection of rivers and wetlands are very important. And I am very happy that yesterday Simon Maxwell visited Buriganga River. And he also saw himself how tannery wastes, untreated wastes are coming to the river directly. So I will be happy if we can get some suggestions from him on this regard.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
We took out Simon yesterday to Buriganga, and given the pollution and also the smell, we offered an oxygen mask, which he politely declined to take with him. Anyway, we'll listen to that. I will come to you. Please, on that side. Yes, please. I'm holding Atik Rahman and Salimul Haq. They will get enough personal access and to do those questions.
Good morning. My name is Carlos Acosta from UNICEF. And I think it was hinted by the student in Dhaka that it's about making a choice in short-term returns and long-term returns. And when politicians need to make decisions, they're making decisions based on constituency, on immediate results, not in long-term. So what do we need a check and balance at the global level to make sure that the long-term is put before the short-term in the climate change discussion? If we had $1 billion, do you put it to solve today's problems or the problems in 15 years?
I want to ask
Please
two
introduce
questions,
yourself.
basically.
Please
My name is Kani Siddiq. I studied economics, and nowadays I do this, that, and the other, basically. So.
Good. But everything in 1 minute, please.
Yeah, 1 minute. I have two questions. One is with 7.4 billion people and their ever-increasing need, can this earth really supply that without really breakthrough technological innovation, number one. Number two is this whole entire philosophy of consumerism that is in the core of development that we practice nowadays. With that philosophy, how do we deal with climate change, with
So that is SDG goal on sustainable production and sustainable consumption. Thank you. Please, Simon, we will come to you. Last row, over there.
Thank you. I have a single question. If we look to the Bangladesh.
Please introduce yourself.
This is Aminul Haq. We are working with Equity Justice Working Group Bangladesh, Equity BD. So in my country, Bangladesh is experiencing a highly political divergence. In this context, how we can ensure the proper climate compatible development planning? Because if we look to the political misunderstanding about the climate change issues.
What you could not solve, you want him to solve it?
Just in case of political divergence, how we can.
Thank you. On that, please come here.
Thank you very much. A beautiful lecture, Simon. I'm Asif Ibrahim. I deal with policy reform issues for the private sector growth in Bangladesh. My first question is, a sort of a general observation, since you've been to Buriganga, and the role of the industry and implementation, a decision that was taken in 2002 to remove the tanneries to a new zone hasn't been implemented. We have a minister who's giving an ultimatum for 72 hours. Let's see the results. It hasn't happened in 13 years. Hopefully, we want to see that it happens very soon. So implementation is a very important aspect of what you said. In terms of the role of the private sector going forward in adaptation, mitigation, and all those things that you mentioned, it is very important. And I think technological innovation from the private sector will be a key, particularly in the area of renewable energy. I think that is where the future lies. My question to you is, in terms of advocating policy to the governments for the private sector, what kind of action plan should we seek for from the government? Because obviously it would require a lot of investment. And a lot of the governments do not want to talk about subsidies nowadays. Where would the money come from for this entire effort? Thank you.
Thank you. Asif, over there. I will come to you. Yes, please.
Mr. Maxwell, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your very illuminating presentation. I am Shonchita Haq. I am Shonchita Haq. I am Director, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I had the opportunity to be present in the climate change negotiation in Paris. I have a question to you. In fact, Paris Agreement is one of the agreements which has many contradictions. It is called legally binding, but we see that there are many things which are not legally binding. Still, this is a very inspiring agreement and which provides really very valuable guidelines to all the people who are, who are stakeholders in climate change. Now, my question is to you is that while we understand that the success of Paris Agreement will largely depend on individual countries' willingness to implement it and to go for climate compatible development, do you really believe and feel that this agreement will really inspire or play a big role in establishing institutions which will really work to that end? Thank you very much.
The institutional challenge of implementation. I will have to close it, huh? Yeah, no, yes, I will come 1, 2, 3. Yes, now it is 45 seconds, please.
Yeah, this is Professor Amin Oman, Head of the Department of Economics, IUB. So my question is that you said that you made hostage by creating some growth figures, okay, of development. Now we are shifting the paradigm and making it another hostage to the threat of climate change. How relevant they are, that's the point.
Okay, over there, please. And then if there is anybody else on the right side, because I had enough from this side. Yes, young man, hold on.
Thank you. I'm Fazl Rabbi Sadegh Ahmed. I'm Deputy Secretary of Government and now working at the Community Climate Change Project under Bangladesh Climate Change Resilience Fund. Thanks, very good presentation. But in your presentation, you actually highlighted all the relevant things, around 15 gigaton gaps and this and that, and it is very emergency for us. But in your paper, it's the Bangladesh perspective, the adaptation needs of the climate vulnerable countries, and what they're suffering for, that is, I think it is ignored over there. And as for example, in Bangladesh, we are losing around 2% GDP on that. We need lots of investment in infrastructure, our communication, our climate. But our priority is not climate smart agriculture. Our priority is poverty eradication. Our priority is development. And
yes,
if we need extra money for mitigation, who will pay for that?
Yes.
If we'll have to consider the development and poverty eradication. And another very important thing for us.
Thank you, sir.
We are not emitting a lot, only 0.4 ton per capita per year and 0.35% global emission. And even we are not access to the carbon market for our low emission.
Thank you very much.
But we are not getting enough technological support for both for adaptation and mitigation.
Thank you. Thank you. I think at the very beginning, Simon very politely mentioned that he is not going to talk about Bangladesh, precisely for that reason, because it seems to be you know it very well by now. So please, the next person. Yes, and then.
My name is Q.M. Mahbub from Dhaka University. Thank you very much, Simon, for your illuminating lecture. What is my question is, as you know that to tackle climate change issues, mitigation should be the central focus. But if you look at the recent literature available, lots of work is done and it is flood of literature on adaptation and adaptation. Why the global community is changing their main focus from mitigation to adaptation? Because adaptation has got lots of problems, especially in Bangladesh. As you know, the Bangladesh has got super high density of population. At the same time, our environment, our climate, our natural hazard, our food security, livelihood, everything is really a problem. And therefore, it will be difficult for us. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Adaptation versus mitigation. It's now half a minute. It will go soon. Please.
Yeah, my name is Abdul Razak. I am former Executive Chairman, Bangladesh Agriculture Research Council. Simon, you have talked about loser and winner. Is there any plan that can be implemented that everybody will lose so that the battle of climate change can be won?
Oh, that's a tagline for today's discussion. Thank you. Over there, last time I will come to this side. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Simon. I just want to,
Please,
I'm Aruma Datto. I am representing Prep Trust. I just want to mention about the climate refugees. We are not talking about in the whole process of the planning and particularly with the think tanks to take with the policy makers, what will be the consequence, which is a big issue of the climate refugees. Thank you.
Thank you. Both internally and externally in that way. So within borders and beyond borders. Yes, please. Let me conclude over here, please. I remember that part.
My name is Shazul Islam Mullah, President Sundar Jibon and Joint Secretary Bangladesh Poribesh Andolan. The question I am going to ask, which has not been asked by anyone else, we are suffering from a salinity problem. And the problem is mostly because of the manipulation of our river waters by the neighboring countries. So rather than the sea level rise. So my question is, how can we fix this problem with the neighboring countries? I know Bangladesh government is trying, but it's not going to happen.
Thank
so
you.
What's your suggestion?
Thank you. I saw somebody over here, and please. We will invite back Simon next time to get the rest. Please.
S.M. Jalil, retired government officers. Now I'm trying to learn forestry and environment and development. If I have not clearly understood, I would like to say that the Paris Agreement has politically recognized, but our development, climate, and so on, so many things, this technical expertise or technical knowledge is very essential. But I'm not clear, Mr. Simon may clear it, number one. Number two,
please.
One second. We are part and parcel of this Hindu Kush Himalayan ecosystem, along with other neighbors. But we cannot manage our problems for since long. How is it that we can increase the source of production of water for increased flow of water into Bangladesh. That is very important.
Thank you. Thank
It
you.
is with
The
carbon
regional approach
and water together.
Sir, thank you. Thank you. The regional approach to climate change and other issues. The second one, Bull. Yes, please.
My name is Jamal. I represent Garment Association in Bangladesh. I have a quick question. I just want to add with Asif what he has said, that who is going to pay for it? And I just want to add another question with that is how we are going to mitigate the time, because we also have a time-bound growth target in our Garment Association, which is a lifeline for the economy of this country. So how to mitigate with the time? Because, for example, I can tell you that, you know, in my textile mill, I'm going to set up a new ETP, and IFC came and said that, okay, we are also going to support it, but I know that it will take years for IFC, and for us, you know, it's a very time-bound thing. So who is going to pay for it, and how we are going to mitigate the time? Thank you.
Thank you. Please. I will. ওখানে কি কেউ বাদ গেল নাকি? I cannot see on the corner.
Thank you very much.
Okay, please.
Can I?
Please, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Simon, for the nice deliberations. We met previously in COP and other places. Well, I know you. The paper, the agreement, or the outcome, I should say, that we have received, there are many good things you said, and I agree with that. And there are some points, loopholes, some sort of holes is there, and we have to fill these holes. However, those are not my questions. My questions is, would you be happy to highlight something on the loss and damage issues, which is a very contentious issue previously? Thank you.
Okay. Losses. Please, let me come to this side first. The young man was waiting patiently over there. Okay?
I'm Masmi Hussain from Bragg University. So my question is, we understand that the competitiveness of developing countries will fall when incorporating with these new eco-friendly agendas and technologies. Can this developing country bear this cost?
Thank you. Simon, just to alert you, we have a whole group of new generation who will survive up to 2070 down to zero carbon level. Huh? So they are over here registered through an open invitation through our website. Please.
Hi, Simon. Thank you for your presentation. My name is Dr. Kelechi Weze. I'm a Master's of Public Health student at Harvard School of Public Health. My question concerns implementation. Have you encountered problems with convincing governments in developing countries that have other priorities, say with growth of their industries, fighting terrorism, to prioritize climate change? And how have you been able to convince them that this is not just a long-term problem, but also a short-term problem that they should also face?
Thank you. Please here, I will come to that side. Please, you'll have to allow me a bit patience,
I'm Nizam Kabir, former Secretary and now Secretary General Dhaka Chamber. My question is to Mr. Maxwell. Do you think that to address poverty climate nexus, ODI may be linked to climate loss and damage as climate debt cancellation facility? Thank you.
Okay, the compensation part. Yes, please, over there.
Thank you very much. I am K. Nurul Huda, Secretary retired, and presently I am the national member of the Bangladesh environment movement. My question is, I actually am wondering whether the countries with emerging economies will help reduce generation of harmful gases at the cost of their development agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Badul Alam Mojumdar from Sujan. As I listened to you, it reminded me of a famous dialogue from King and I, the famous drama. Democracy in my country, what I say it is. So global goals have been touted as the most revolutionary goals, which will shape the whole world. So will they be what our countries say what they are?
very economic. I will take 10 seconds to really absorb that question, please.
I am Nasser Khan, founder, BAPA, and chairman, Save the Environment Movement. My question is, do you think TPP will be the challenge for the environment mitigation for the third world countries? If so, what should we do?
Which one?
TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Trans-Pacific Partnership,
Yeah.
TPP. Okay.
How it will impact on
Okay.
mitigation
Okay.
from the developing perspective.
Thank you.
What will
Yes, Nasser, thank you. Is there anybody else who is not going to be able to sleep tonight without saying the words? Huh? Is there anybody over there? The young lady at the last row. Those who will leave up to 2070 will get preference.
Hello, I am Mitali Fatman, Research Associate, BITS. My question is how it possible to balance winner and loser globally without considering the historical pollutant in terms of climate change? Thank you.
Oh, the historicism in the solution. Please, madam. I will close now. Please.
I'm not a young lady, but anyway, the key word for me in your speech is responsibility. The problems are global today, risks and responsibility. Risks are global. And how do the leaders see the bringing up this responsibility, which is individual versus collective? You cannot have this collective responsibility at a higher level and run these problems. Multi-sectoral, you mentioned, multidisciplinary, which is very important. And in your three important things, leaders and others, for me is very important building this responsibility in a multicultural world where values may not be the same. So these differences may come from values. You need a global commitment, so you need a global consent based on values in a very diverse world.
Thank
and how
you.
the leaders see that.
Thank you. The last point, please, close to the pillar.
Thank you. I'm Mukhlis Rahman from a national NGO named Center for Natural Resources Studies. I have just a comment. I think this sort of internationally consensual agreements have very high potential to resolve development challenges or problems. But I think major challenge remains with the disconnectedness, because I believe that every citizen of the country, of each country, has a role to play to realize the goals and targets. But often we see that this sort of agreements or the facts and goals and targets are limited to very, very few people. And the vast majority, including the village communities, development actors, even the state actors, remains disconnected. So that's, I think we should take care of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the rest of us will he is going to leave ill. He's not going to be able to sleep tonight if he doesn't sleep tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, Maxwell, for your lecture. I am Mahmudul Hassan Koli from Jahangirnagar University. I am the MPhil researcher of Transboundary River Management. My question is, how do Bangladesh adopt it with climate change in terms of water management, while Bangladesh get 75% water resource from neighboring countries? Please, can you comment on this?
That's also related to the regional approach once again. Simon, as you can see, all these questions which were coming through, 1 minute, that is coming through is in some way, it's a sublimation of the wariness which the Bangladesh as a country, as a society, holds in itself in that way. It is a unique platform to share those concerns and also the worries and also the aspirations in many ways. So I think I take these questions and comments particularly in that spirit. There had been some questions which relates to specifically to scientific issues. I think it is a multidisciplinary community. I'm not quite sure how we can take the scientific discussion forward. But I think your three pillars will fit in very well in analyzing, putting all the questions in the right perspective. One is the leadership issue along with the values and other issues which have come in, and democratization of the leadership with the grassroots and etc. The second one was the design, where these winners and losers, balancing the winners and losers and flanking measures, and the long-term and the short-term issues, all these issues can fall in. And also there is the issue of the implementation, because there are specific issues of financing and other technology access to others. So I see all these questions. You have presupposed how you can cluster them in certain ways in that way. And I can only envy a person who can give an analytical framework to very anarchic set of questions in certain ways in that way. So I invite you to put more sense in that particular area. Colleagues, before I hand it over to you, let me congratulate you for giving us the right questions, because answers are less important. Having the right question is sometimes more important than having the answers. Give a big hand to all those who have participated in this one. Simon.
You've done me a great favor, Deb, by allowing so many questions that I can only answer 10%. So you'll forgive me if I don't deal with everything, including all those. You've only got to be in Bangladesh for 2 days, as I have been, to know that there are some topics that should not be discussed in polite society. You know, coal, rivers, a number of other issues where I'm not going to venture too deeply. But I think the point you made is actually one of the things that think tanks do is create an epistemic community of people with shared interests, bringing together, in this case, some development people, but also some climate people, the private sector and the NGOs and the researchers and the government. And so this is something that you should hang on to, actually. Having this kind of discussion format where these questions can be debated. Now, I've picked out, I think, 4 things that I want to respond to. The first is partly about kind of personal action and how we are going to deal with reaching this target. You know, there are many reasons to be worried about a very large arms industry and for controlling wasteful expenditure and doing something about conflict, and not just climate change. But also we have to kind of translate those changes into our own personal behavior. I'm married to a vegetarian, and for years I have crept out in the middle of the night to, when she's asleep, to find a meat sandwich or something. But I'm trying to eat less meat, because actually we know that one of the greatest burdens from the food system on the climate and on the environment more generally is meat. And even we used to think in the UK that sheep grown on the high hills, free range, were less damaging to the climate than intensively reared animals. Maybe that isn't true. So we have to be taking personal action. We need to fly less. We need to consume less. We need to waste less. And often when I talk to audiences in other countries about this, I ask people to do their carbon calculator and to see how many tons they're using. We know that we have to be at less than 2 tons by 2050, and those of us who belong to audiences like this in a kind of global middle class are certainly at 15 or 20, even if the national average is much less. So we all have to take some action, and that action probably includes taking a serious look at disinvestment, for example, in certain companies that are not conducive to the climate. So that's number 1. Number 2 is a set of questions around what's the narrative? How do we sell this? What about the Copenhagen consensus? Why isn't adaptation taken seriously? First of all, there was a UNICEF poster years ago, which you may remember, which was a small child sitting on the ground. And the question is asked to the small child, what do you want to be when you grow up? And in the poster, the child answers, alive. You know, and I think actually let's start with the fact that we cannot deal with climate if we are going to lay bodies on the road to getting to a clean climate. There has to be a way of managing the human rights, the dignity, the respect, the human development, the livelihood of people today. And we can do that. And there are some ways in which that is being done. First of all, the dominant narrative in Paris, those of you who were there will know, was about the win-win options from climate action. That actually green growth can be the fastest route to growth. These are new industries which are coming up. An example I often cite is that China exports to Europe every year $30 billion worth of solar panels. This started not as an industry to put solar power in China, but as an industry to put solar panels on the roofs in Frankfurt and in London. It's an export industry for China. It's an opportunity for China. It's a private sector-driven encroachment in the world market, which enables China to create jobs at home. How many other such opportunities are there? And we saw many of them being discussed by companies in Paris. I'll come back to some of the issues about the private sector in a second. The other big driver of much of the current discussion is what are called the co-benefits. Clean air as a major benefit of reducing carbon emissions. And there is a figure which I can't remember, but you can easily find it, which is about the benefits to human health today of reducing pollution from traffic in cities. I read of an American school in one country, which I won't name, but you can guess, one of the most polluted cities in the world, not so far from here, where 25 teachers have resigned and are calling themselves fresh air refugees. Because actually they find it difficult to bring up families in a very polluted city. And you don't have to spend very long in some of the cities of this part of the developing world to understand why that might be the case. And of course, something I'm very conscious of on every visit to Dhaka is traffic. I always think that everybody in Dhaka should buy themselves a caravan so that they can live between the office and home. And cook your meals and sleep and so on. Reducing traffic pollution. I was in Bogota recently, where they have introduced this rapid transit bus system, which has transformed traffic in the city because they've made clear ways for the buses, and the buses rocket from one side of the city to another, and they become very popular with people. That is a huge current benefit. So when the Copenhagen Consensus dismisses action on climate change, I think we need to recognize that there are many things we need to do, including high on the Copenhagen Consensus list is nutrition, for example, for small children. And as a board member of the International Food Policy Research Institute, I'm also passionate about nutrition of small children. But we must make sure these are not conflicts and between these different objectives. And let's make sure that we have both nutrition for children and we reap the current co-benefits from climate change. And of course, that is also true for the farmer who complains about the cost of doing something today relative to the benefit in the future, because farmers benefit today if there is less climate extreme impact on their crops and if there are less damage as a result of pollution. So that's the second point. The third point is the private sector. Look, I think the private sector is absolutely the engine of growth and can make huge contributions to innovation, that it needs to be supported. But we also know everywhere we look that the private sector needs to behave responsibly, environmentally and socially, and sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. And so how do we change that situation? Often we hear from certain groups that the only way is to attack the private sector. And I think it's necessary sometimes to be highly vocal and visible about the problems caused by the private sector. But we can also look to the psychology and the self-interest of the private sector themselves. And when I've worked on private sector and development and worked with many business leaders in Davos and other places, I've identified a 4-step ladder for the private sector. On the first step, we find social corporate responsibility, and actually corporate social responsibility. Actually, many private sector institutions invest heavily in corporate social responsibility for a variety of reasons. Sometimes because they really want to, sometimes because actually it's a really good brand management strategy. Young people in our country anyway, want to work for companies that are seen to be doing good. They don't want to work for the companies that are big polluters or are damaging the environment or have unethical supply chains. And also, if you are acting in a responsible way, you have a license to operate with your local community. You're not going to get bricks through the window if you behave well to your neighbors. So that's the first step on the ladder. The second step on the ladder is international regimes. And we talk about the United Nations frameworks, for example, and you sign up to that and you have to allow unions and representation. So third step, you revise your business model because it makes money for you. and serving small consumers, the bottom of the pyramid, changing your supply chain, as many big companies are doing, to involve more small producers. Anglo-American, unbundling contracts so that small producers can contribute to these huge mine investments. And then fourthly, we see in Davos very much companies working together in pre-competitive partnerships to develop new technology, the next generation of biofuels and so on. Now, will this work on its own, this combination of civil society pressure and the self-interest and motivation of companies? We hope it will, sometimes it won't. The other big factor that we can then bring in is consumer pressure. And there are many of the most polluting industries in the developing world are supplying Western markets. And we saw, for example, how the Rana Plaza tragedy in Bangladesh has changed the way in which the big retail clothing companies are looking at their supply chains. More inspection, more investment, more partnership with the private sector. And there are many other polluting sectors around the world in different industries which could benefit from that kind of consumer pressure. I was on the board of the Fair Trade Foundation. We have fair trade coffee, fair trade tea, fair trade bananas. Why can't we buy fair trade leather products, fair trade textiles and so on? So we can use consumer pressure to add to these other items that I've mentioned. And then finally, this very interesting question about whether the institutions are adequate, and that reflects also on the regional issues that some of you have mentioned. I thought the Paris talks were very interesting in that we managed to avoid almost completely the question of were people doing enough? There are many websites where you can get rankings of countries of who's done well and who hasn't done enough. You know, Bhutan, Morocco, Ethiopia, Rwanda, some other countries in Latin America are right at the top of that ranking, and we can guess who the countries are that are not doing as much, countries which still have emissions per capita of 15, 20 tons per capita. And we don't have the institutions that will necessarily punish those people. We don't have sanctions in the legal agreement, but we do have a review process which will, in due course, I think, name and shame the countries that aren't doing enough. That has to be backed up by strong monitoring, reporting, and verification. And I think we are moving slowly towards a much more transparent global system. And we multilateralists, and I guess most of us need to make sure that we build the institutions which will hold countries to account. And those include regional institutions like river authorities across borders. I've carefully avoided talking about loss and damage, which, as you all know, is a very, very contentious issue. And I think that there is very little mileage, frankly, in developing countries pushing for something that is only going to cause even more annoyance and that you're not going to get. Nobody is going to say, we accept historic responsibility and therefore will agree to legally binding compensation payments. I don't think it's personally a very fruitful course to pursue, but it can be quite a useful negotiating ploy. What is true is that countries who have the money, including the emerging donors, must invest much more in humanitarian action and in funding adaptation. And it's important that the Green Climate Fund, as just one example, has, I think, 50%, is that right, Salim, of its budget is to be devoted to adaptation. And whoever said the needs are huge is quite right. I think that we could speak for hours about all this stuff. What I'm really delighted about is that CPD has created today the epistemic community in Dhaka that will enable these conversations to be debated in much finer detail than we've been able to do, with much more detailed analysis. I'm going to come back to Dhaka in 2070. The sky will be blue. I'll be 122 years old, I think. The sky will be blue. The metro system and the Transmilenio rapid transit bus system will speed me from one side to the other. There will be zero pollution in the rivers. Everybody will have a decent job doing environmentally sustainable work. Everybody will be living to 122. Bangladesh will have achieved the dream it has set itself, and it will be because of the work that the people in this room have done. I wish you luck. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon, for those responses. I can't hold myself from mentioning that Simon does have a very good connection with Bangladesh. His wife, some years back, produced a docudrama on a Bangladeshi girl living in Birmingham and how she migrated from Bangladesh and created her new life and a new business and struggling to find the identity, whether she is a Bangladeshi or a British. So Simon knows the Bangladeshi milieu very well, and you can see that the way he speaks and touches our mind in that way. Colleague, if you allow me, and Mustafiz, our chairman, if allows me, let us bring in a bouquet for Simon. It's all white. It signifies the polluter-free and pollution-free situation of the country.
Well, that is beautiful and very kind, and thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you all very much for spending your Saturday morning at this lecture. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, and let me invite our founder chairman, Professor Rehman Sovan, to make the concluding remark. Thank you very much for being with us today. Oh, I'm sorry. And we have a crest to commemorate the occasion so that he can take it back home and put it on his table.
That is, thank you. I see you had this made before the lecture, so it's a good job I didn't have a flu or something.
We could anticipate it will be a very successful lecture. Thank you. Sir.
Thank you very much.
Simon, friends, to begin with, of course, let me apologize. I'm sort of recovering from the sort of seasonal flu, so if my voice sounds deeper than it normally is, I hope you can still hear me. To begin with, of course, I would like to register my profound appreciation to Simon Maxwell. I have actually known him for many years, possibly even longer than Deva Priyo, and from the days when, in fact, his hair was not as distinguished as it is now. And, of course, he has all along been an extraordinary combination of empirical economist, but with a good understanding of the realities of the development process and the interconnectivity of the various disciplines which go to make up development economics. What I was particularly reminded of, though, was that, of course, in his more recent incarnations as heading one of the leading global think tanks on development, the ODI, he had absorbed many of the relevant lessons about what it takes to, in fact, be an effective civil society organization. And I found his messages, which he communicated at the outset of his presentation, particularly instructive, and I hope noted by my colleagues and all of you here who are practitioners in the same terrain. Of course, the contextual framework in which civil society organizations operate is heavily contingent on the receptiveness of the political environment and the sort of relevant institutions of governance to, in fact, interface with civil society organizations and to be receptive to ideas and even challenges with which they are not sort of traditionally comfortable. So there is always a contextual framework, as Simon has no doubt appreciated dealing with successive governments in his own country and had exposure around the world to the functioning of civil society institutions. On his coverage of the theme of his presentation, this of course is an area where I am least qualified to comment. So at best, what I would like to really draw from what he has said is some of the important messages which he presented, but where he didn't really go in to the follow-up questions which in fact really arise from the messages he delivered over here. What I was very interested in was to note the distinction he made from the style of John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson. And I would put Simon's presentation to you in the category of a Kennedy-esque statement, reflecting the world of Camelot, where in fact you have a sense of idealism about what you wish to do to address the numerous problems which had gone unaddressed for many years in the United States until Kennedy came to power. But the corresponding follow-up on this, on how in fact Lyndon Johnson went about his business in the less glamorous task of in fact actually operationalizing a vision and dealing, and this is I think the very central element of a conversation which I'm sure Simon has had, but we have not been exposed to it today, on how to deal with the challenges of realizing that vision, because this is really the central issue which all people who are engaged in the area of sustainable development and the way in which we can carry it forward within a a fast changing world exposed to climate change is of course the real challenge. What I would have liked to have heard over here, and I'm sure it is not that Simon has not addressed this, but what would I think be appropriate to an ongoing conversation over here, is the specific challenges which we face both domestically and at the global level in effectualizing the outcomes of the Paris conference. And I think for at least globally, the elephant on the global stage will always be, to one extent, the most powerful of the polluting countries, like the United States and China. Obviously, China has bought into the whole goal of, in fact, climate change mitigation and is, in fact, actually taking a public position. The position of the United States, on the other hand, is much less clear, particularly if by global good fortune, a gentleman by the name of Mr. Donald Trump gets elected President of the United States. Now, whether Trump or Cruz or people who now constitute what is in fact really the core of the Republican Party even recognize that there is such a problem as a environmental crisis facing the globe, and in their inability to face up to this and to in fact not just question it, but to in fact actually reduce it to a conspiracy of liberals and tree huggers who are in fact out to in fact damage the growth potential of the US private sector. How are we actually going to deal with this? Can you in fact actually go ahead when the most biggest and more significant, the politically most powerful country in the world has really not bought into this particular agenda, and in fact its own willingness to both support it and to in fact actually make adjustments in its own approach to climate change is in fact questionable. In the prevailing market realities of the world, where now energy prices have dropped to $30 a barrel and maybe going downward, whether this will in fact be seen as a serious setback to the climate change process also has to be considered, because presumably what is going on is the move towards fuel-efficient smaller cars, which were presumably on the table when energy was coming in at $100 a barrel, may well lead now to many more SUVs coming into the market. In fact, actually, looking at the proliferation of SUVs in Bangladesh, you would not exactly get the impression that we are a country which is sort of heavily preoccupied at the level of our sort of ruling elites with such a problem as climate change. And if you in fact look at the collateral problem of the traffic crisis, which obviously comes from the very large number of multiple technologies of transport competing for road space, again you have a big problem of how realistically we are really assessing this problem. Let me sum this up in a way by taking the conversation back to looking at it from the prism of Bangladesh itself as to how we and other countries which are in fact expected to participate in the global change approach this. Now, I don't know, in fact, if I recollect, over the course of the last 30 years, at least some people, I don't know, you can put your hands up, were in fact going on little missions sailing down the Buriganga as a protest at its pollution. And I presume they still continue to sail down the Buriganga, but of course I do not know if the Buriganga can be classified as having been less polluted. Judging from the fact that we wanted to offer Simon, in fact, a gas mask before he sort of went out there, the suggestion might be that we still have not really made much of an impact. Now, the interesting challenge, I would say, for those who are addressing this problem of environmental pollution is to simply look at the diagnostics of our failure over here, where the whole nation wants something to be done. There is a serious problem, but why nothing could be done? Secondly, look at the drama which is going on over the Hazaribagh relocation of the tanneries. Now, someone mentioned 30 years. I have exposure which goes back half a century, where in fact Hazaribagh was being polluted by effluents, and the demand for a effluent treatment plant was in fact really in the works over there. But neither have you got the effluent treatment plant, nor in fact has an elementary relocation process with appropriate environmental protections associated with it really been enforceable even after a period of 30 years or so. Now, again, let us ask the simple question, why not? I mean, if you can find an effective answer to that, I mean, there are some very obvious answers to that, but if you in fact do the diagnostics of that, you may then be addressing some of the very significant challenges which in fact really face the constituencies which in fact are in the vanguard of in fact promoting climate change. Third issue, of course, where we are witness within Bangladesh to the filling in of many of our sort of water drainage channels in Dhaka, where in fact water spaces have gradually been disappearing over the years. When you in fact now factor in the current price of land and the current rates of return on real estate development, what implication this is going to have, both in economic, environmental, and political terms, on the remaining water spaces that we actually have in Bangladesh, and what you are actually going to do about this. How do you actually address these particular problems? Now, my own conclusion on this would be that there is presumably some subtext in the literature on dealing with the political economy and the challenges associated with building a more sustainable world, which is in fact dealing with the now very life-threatening challenges of climate change. But somehow or the other, this conversation doesn't figure very strongly in the way in which we address this problem. I would, in fact, say that a good measure of the seriousness and credibility of governments would be if you identify 2 or 3 of these challenges and you, in fact, do a quick assessment of how they have actually been dealt with in the realities of politics and policy making. A final test case would be that suppose actually the global community, which is actually not even now investing any significant sums of money, would come up and say, well, look here, I mean, I think we can't really afford this. It's your problem. You find a solution for both mitigation and adaptation. Now, were the ball to be put in our court, what resources would we be willing to allocate from our budget? To give you a counterfactual, when the World Bank withdrew from the funding of the Padma Bridge, the political challenge was met by the Prime Minister, and they have now committed 28,000 crores to construct this from our own resources. That would be what, about $4 billion? Now the question is, if in fact the international community were to withdraw all assistance for climate change financing, would we be willing to make a similar reallocation of our budgetary resources? This would be a good assessment of the way in which we in fact respond to it. I mean, if basically climate change financing is seen as a good cash cow for international assistance, and this is one of the central dynamics of this process internationally, obviously this is not really going to be a very sort of serious indicator of the way in which governments are willing to prioritize this problem. At the end of the day, the burden is obviously going to fall on the common people who, in the absence of mitigation, have been adapters for the last 1 century in a place like Bangladesh. And of course, one of the principal means of adaptation is migration, where you first migrate to the cities, then you migrate to your neighboring countries, and after that you migrate to the globe. As Bangladesh is therefore, you may say, one of the global world's leading adapters. And in fact, all we are now waiting to do is the opportunity to colonize Siberia in the next 20 years, so that perhaps one of the best solutions which might be taken by our government is to give as a fundamental right an international passport to every citizen, and perhaps some warm winter clothing to go with it. So in fact, adaptation can in fact go along in ways in which Bangladeshis have been meeting this challenge for many years. So Simon, I have opened up a round of new lectures by you at some stage in the game, and I hope this conversation will continue, because your capacity to both provoke and stimulate is without parallel. And the fact that you can, in fact, engage people the way you have means that we need to sort of draw upon you whenever you're available, and even if you are not, to in fact really take this conversation forward. Thank you very much.
As you can see that when the chairman and the executive director loses their voice, it's always to my benefit. I can get time to speak. So now on behalf of Mustafiz and my other colleagues from CPD, we would like to invite you for a cup of tea or coffee, whatever you prefer, and some refreshments. Thank you very much for being with us today morning.